I was sitting quietly in the living room, the soft ticking of the old clock marking the steady passing of time. The day was slipping into evening, the fading light casting long shadows on the pictures of my family that adorned the mantel. Memories of laughter and warmth wrapped the room, memories I had spent a lifetime building. Then David's voice cut through the calm, sharp, and cold. "You have to pay my mortgage from now on." The words struck me like a blow. I looked up, stunned, caught off guard by the bluntness in his tone, a tone that carried no gratitude, no respect, only entitlement. My breath caught. The quiet house suddenly felt oppressive, walls closing in. My mind raced through years of sacrifice, working overtime to put him through college, taking on extra debt to keep a roof over our heads, the countless times I had patched the holes in his life with my own savings and silence. A bitter taste rose in my throat. David's wife stood nearby, arms crossed, wearing a half-smile that was pure dismissal. "He can't just get a better job or manage his own money," she chimed in, her words like salt in a wound. "You're the one with the means. It's only fair." I felt the sting of humiliation creep through me. I fought to keep my voice steady, to remind her silently of who had built this family's foundation, but the words lodged deep in my chest. I could barely summon strength against the cold arrogance between them. David's gaze held a calculating edge. "I'm serious, Dad. This is not a request. I'm done waiting." The room grew suffocating. The very people I loved had turned on me, demanding I sacrifice not out of love, but out of obligation. My heart ached, the pain sharp and unfamiliar. All those years of patience and giving seemed invisible in that moment. Without a word, I rose, the chair scraping against the floor, too loud in the charged silence. Faces blurred around me, once familiar, now distant, almost foreign. I wanted to storm out, to flee this house that no longer felt like mine. But it was more than a house. It was my life's work, my legacy. In that moment, I realized I could no longer be the man who gave endlessly without respect or reciprocation. The years of sacrifice had forged a resolve inside me that surprised even myself. I wouldn't give quietly anymore. Not this time. I didn't yell or argue. I simply stepped outside, the heavy door closing behind me like the final beat of a chapter. The cool air hit my face, sharp and clear, and for the first time in a long while, the pain inside was mingled with something new, awakening and resolve. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was no longer about money. It was about dignity, and I was ready to fight for it. When I closed the door behind me and returned to the quiet refuge of my study, the familiar mix of old books and worn leather greeted me like an old friend. The night had deepened around the house, but inside, the small pool of light from my desk lamp illuminated a world that was at once comforting and filled with echoes of the past. I let myself sink into the worn leather chair, its creak a small reminder of years gone by. The silence was heavy, but not unwelcome. It demanded honesty and reflection, and in that stillness, I allowed my mind to drift back through all the sacrifices that had led me to this moment. I saw the younger version of myself once again, long nights pacing the small apartment, with bills scattered across the table like an endless puzzle I had to solve. Maria was always there beside me, steady and soft-spoken, the unyielding strength who carried her own burdens without complaint. I remembered the countless hours spent calculating ways to stretch every dollar, the nights without sleep where worry gnawed into my bones. For David, for the future of this family, I pushed through the fatigue and the mounting debts. I vividly recalled the agonizing decision to sell the family car, how the weight of that choice pressed down on me like a physical ache. That car had been our constant companion, carrying us through simple joys and crises alike. Handing over the keys to a stranger felt like losing a piece of home, breaking a promise I had made to my family. But Maria steadied my hand with a quiet assurance. David's education mattered more than any vehicle. That sacrifice was the thorn in my side, but also the reason I could hope for better days ahead. I told myself then that the pain was temporary, a seed sown for his future growth, and yet now that future seemed a cruel mirage. The boy who once looked at me with bright-eyed trust, the son who relied on my sacrifices and steady love, had become a man who demanded my resources with no trace of gratitude. The starkness of that betrayal cut deeper than any debt or hardship ever had. I found myself asking, had I been invisible all these years? Was my love and hard work forgotten, reduced to an obligation in the eyes of my own son? Still, beneath the bitter ache, a different feeling began to rise. Quiet determination, flickering like a stubborn flame. Life had taught me many lessons far beyond personal sacrifice. As a banking executive, I had learned to detect deception, to read between the lines of contracts and portfolios, to unravel schemes that hid beneath polished facades. My career had been built on patience, attention to detail, and the calm resilience to face crises head-on. Those skills had not faded. They were tools I could still use, quiet weapons in this new battle. Surrounded by the tomes of law and financial records on my shelves, I realized I held an arsenal only decades of experience could grant. This was not just a father's heart broken. It was a seasoned strategist, ready to move beyond pain. I could investigate, analyze, and act with precision, no angry confrontations, only measured moves. I remembered how, years ago, I had solved a complex fraud case at the bank without public spectacle, quietly securing justice while protecting all parties involved. That experience crystallized my approach. Patience paired with careful strategy, I would navigate this familial betrayal with the same steady hand. My eyes fell on a photograph of Maria and me, young and hopeful, full of dreams that shaped the foundation of this family. That foundation was built on love and sacrifice, something far too precious to let crumble now. In the quiet of my study, holding the image close, I felt a powerful mix of grief and resolve tighten in my chest. This legacy was my responsibility, not to be tossed aside by arrogance or disrespect. The long nights of sacrifice, the quiet patching of wounds, the endless patience, they were not debts owed to my son, but markers of my own strength and capacity for endurance. They were proof that I deserved respect, that I had the right to demand dignity in return for a lifetime of giving. As I sat enveloped in those memories, the night outside deepened, shadows thickening across the lawn. The house settled into silence, but inside me, clarity dawned. This was no longer just about money or mortgages. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, about standing firm against the erosion of my worth. I closed my eyes and drew in a deep, steadying breath. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with confrontation, decisions, and the slow dismantling of broken trust. But I would face it deliberately, armed with patience and precision. The man forged by decades of hard work was no victim. He was a protector of what was rightfully his. In the solitude of the room, amidst the reminders of hardship and love, I found a quiet affirmation. Dignity was not granted freely, but taken with resolve. Rising from my chair, I felt a shift. The burden of the night lessened, buoyed by a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would demand strength and careful planning, and I was ready to meet it. Tonight, I held fast to the truth that had carried me through every challenge. That dignity, once lost, could be reclaimed, not with anger but with unyielding resolve. And so I vowed to reclaim mine, for Maria, for myself, and for the man I still was, beneath the scars of sacrifice. The first light of morning crept through the curtains, but sleep had long abandoned me. David's words from the previous evening echoed relentlessly in my mind. You have to pay my mortgage from now on. It was not just a demand. It was an erasure of all the years of silent sacrifices, the love and the sweat that had built the foundation of this family. That sting of betrayal was sharp, but mingled in it was a fierce clarity, a hardening of resolve. The man who had given so much silently was back, but this time he was ready to act, not just endure. I sat at the kitchen table, the bitter taste of coffee matching the bitterness that settled deep inside. The task ahead was clear. I had to uncover the truth behind this demand. My years in banking taught me that what surfaces is rarely the whole story. Beneath David's arrogance lay something needing to be understood. Was this just entitlement, or was there a trail leading to more troubling secrets? Opening the folders of financial statements I kept meticulously even in retirement, I began peeling back layers. Tracing each transaction, I noticed discrepancies, withdrawals with no clear justification, sums diverted to accounts I didn't recognize. The pattern was unmistakable. David had been drawing from the family investment portfolio in ways he had never explained. It was a betrayal not only of my trust, but of the very legacy Maria and I had worked tirelessly to build. The cold clarity of realization settled like ice. This was not a simple request for help, but deliberate misappropriation. My heart clenched quietly, anger simmering beneath the surface, but I reminded myself that impulsive reactions would serve none of us. I needed evidence, patience, and a plan. That evening, I orchestrated a meeting under the guise of addressing family finances. The dining room felt heavy with unspoken tension as I laid out the facts plainly, avoiding accusation, focusing on the numbers. The stark truth was impossible to ignore, but David's response was anything but remorseful. His contempt was palpable, a sneer twisting his mouth as he declared me old-fashioned and weak. His words landed like blows, but I met them with a calm I hadn't expected from myself. This was not a son seeking understanding. It was an adversary dismissing a lifetime of effort. The man I once knew, the one who had looked up to me, had been replaced by someone unrecognizable, driven by greed and entitlement. Any hope for simple reconciliation shattered in that moment. Faced with this harsh reality, I understood that my pain had to be channeled into strategy. I turned to the tools I knew best, the ones honed over decades of banking and finance. Dusting off ledgers, legal binders, and contract files, I allowed the methodical side of me, the man who thrived in complexity, to re-emerge. Reaching out to an old trusted lawyer friend, I shared the disturbing patterns I'd uncovered. His serious eyes met mine with understanding, not sympathy, but respect for the fight ahead. We began plotting a course built on legal precision, gathering irrefutable evidence of mismanagement, challenging ownership where appropriate, and preparing to make the claims that would restore justice. My investigation broadened quietly. Conversations with neighbors, financial advisors, and vendors revealed further cracks in David's facade. Recklessness, irresponsibility, and attempts to mask debts and liabilities. Each piece of information was another brick laid in the foundation of my case, another step toward reclaiming what had been disrespected. Throughout this unfolding drama, I maintained a composed exterior. Family events had become subdued affairs, charged with undercurrents of tension I carefully navigated. No outbursts, no confrontations, only patient observation, waiting for the opportune moment to act. My role had shifted. I was no longer the weathered father endured by the family, but a calm strategist seeing moves several steps ahead. David's frustration manifested in angry phone calls, bitter accusations, and threats aimed to intimidate me. I wore the mantle of patience with quiet dignity, deflecting his provocations, refusing to be baited. This was a battle of wills and wits, and I intended to win it on my terms, decisively, without unnecessary noise. Within the family, lines were quietly drawn. Some began to question the story David spun, their allegiance wavering as facts emerged like cracks in a mirror. The pedestal built on entitlement and manipulated truth was crumbling. At night, surrounded by reminders of sacrifice, old photographs, letters, and binders filled with contracts, I found solace and strength. The betrayal filled me with sorrow, but I refused to be broken by it. I was no longer a victim, but a protector of dignity and inheritance, a man shaped by a lifetime of struggles and triumphs. Daylight after daylight, I readied myself for the battles ahead. I reminded myself of the man beneath the scars, a man forged by endurance, intellect, and resolve. The journey would be long and arduous, but surrender was not a choice. As the quiet settled deep into the house, and I prepared to face another day, I felt a renewed calm. The fight was just beginning, but I had found a new identity, not as the wronged, but as the determined, the steady hand ensuring justice would be done. For Maria, for the sacrifices made, for myself, I would stand firm and reclaim what was mine. Not with rage, but with the unwavering resolve of a man who knew his worth and had the strength to defend it. The moment I settled into this phase of my fight, I understood that patience would be my most valuable ally. This struggle was woven from patience, strategy, and time, much different from the impulsive reactions of a grieving father feeling betrayed. I reminded myself daily that victory would not come from quick confrontation, but from the slow unspooling of truths hidden beneath layers of deception. My previous career had trained me in precisely this kind of endurance, and I leaned into the methods I knew best. Nights were spent hunched over every statement, ledger and contract, documents carefully organized into piles, mortgages here, investment accounts there, statements sprinkled with suspicious transactions. My eyes grew weary, scanning columns of numbers until patterns began surfacing. Transfers made at unusual times, amounts slipping between accounts that lacked transparent explanation, and loans taken out without my knowledge or consent. All these painted a picture darker than I expected. David was not merely careless. He was covertly funneling family assets in ways meant to conceal his negligence, and perhaps more. As I traced the money, the ache inside me twisted anew. Those funds were built not only with dollars, but with years of sacrifice, late nights, working extra shifts, foregoing comforts to ensure our family's security, and the deep, steady love Maria and I carried with us every step. This misuse was a betrayal layered atop heartbreak, but beneath the bitter taste, the legal and financial strategist in me awoke fully, galvanizing into action. I called upon an old friend, an attorney who had stood by me through judicial battles and intricate contract disputes. At his office, amid the quiet buzz of informed professionalism, I laid out the evidence we had gathered. His expression was grave but steady, a reflection of the seriousness we both understood. Together, we charted a course that would not just be reactionary but surgical. The freezing of accounts, the legal challenge to fraudulent claims, and the careful collecting of affidavits from witnesses with first-hand knowledge. With precise instructions, I began reaching out discreetly to people in David's orbit. Vendors unpaid for months, financial advisors troubled by his shifting stories, neighbors who had observed suspicious activities. Each conversation added weight to a mounting case. I stayed vigilant, not to alert David or his allies. This was not a public crusade, but a quietly building force designed to ensure the truth would come to light in the most damning way possible. As these pieces came together, I felt a growing strength. Every new detail validated the fight, transformed the pain into purpose. This was no vanishing battle. It was a movement toward restoring honor and accountability, a reckoning grounded in the memory of every sacrifice made for the family. The house became a more tenuous place. Social gatherings were dampened by an unspoken tension. Smiles grew strained, and conversations took on an edge of guardedness. I wore my composure like armor, revealing nothing of the storm of planning and investigation that churned beneath my calm exterior. I watched closely, reading expressions, listening for slips, and noting shifts of allegiance. The patient observer now held the threads of a complicated web. David's responses to my quiet campaign took on a predictable venom. His phone calls became lightning strikes of rage and menace, thinly veiled threats attempting to undermine my confidence. But I answered with a measured tone, returning no fire, refusing to be drawn into his emotional chaos. This was not a feud of blows, but of wills, and I held mine unyielding. Within the family, whisperings of doubt began to swell into conversations. Side glances and soft questions revealed a subtle unraveling of the narrative David had held for so long. The pedestal of entitlement was starting to wobble. For the first time in years, I sensed allies emerging quietly among those who had once been silent or indifferent. At the end of each day, in the stillness of my study, surrounded by relics of a shared life, I found moments of stark reflection. Photographs of Maria smiling brightly, letters penned with hopes and dreams, the faded contracts that symbolized years of hard-fought security. These were my refugees. They reminded me of what was at stake, giving fuel to a resolve that no shadow of betrayal had been able to extinguish. I was no longer simply a victim of falsehoods. I was a guardian of legacy and dignity. The fight had moved beyond personal grievance into a broader, deeper mission. Every document reviewed, every witness spoken to, was a brick rebuilding the foundation that had been shook. Weeks turned into months of relentless effort. The pace was exhausting, but I held steady, pacing myself with the endurance only a lifetime of trials had taught me. The evidence grew, detailed and unassailable. Every layer revealed more truths, and with each new fact uncovered, the fortress of deception around David weakened. I witnessed his once sheltered confidence dissolve under pressure. Blame shifted like quicksand beneath him, excuses giving way to frustration and desperation. His facade of control crumbled to exposing cracks and stutters in conversations and transactions. The man who had demanded everything without gratitude was now faltering against the very systems his neglect had endangered. Each day concluded with solemn contemplation. The journey from wounded father to focused strategist was neither quick nor smooth, but it was unequivocally transformative. I had found a new self, one forged in fire, tempered by knowledge, and unshakable in resolve. Maria's memory was my compass and my strength when weariness threatened to consume me. Her belief in the power of dignity, in the necessity of standing firm for family, was the silent voice urging me onward. This was not just about reclaiming assets, but honor, respect, and the validation of sacrifices made with love. As I filed legal motions and coordinated with trusted confidants, the groundwork for the upcoming confrontation was laid meticulously. I was no longer the man defeated by personal betrayal, but the architect of measured, effective retribution. Each step was deliberate, every action a testament to the life's training that had prepared me. The fight to reclaim what was mine, both tangible and intangible, had become my purpose. The story of lost trust and betrayal had transformed into a campaign for justice, fueled not by rage, but by a calm, focused strength honed over years. I knew the road ahead would challenge every ounce of patience and fortitude I possessed, yet every sacrifice, every hardship Maria and I had borne, every moment of silence and endurance before this reckoning had prepared me. This battle was mine to see through, to restore not just what was lost materially, but the dignity that had been questioned and the legacy that deserved respect. For her, for myself, and for the truth that endures beyond family discord, I stood unwavering, ready to meet whatever came next with the steadfast resolve of a man who knew his worth and refused to bow to injustice. When I formally stopped the mortgage payments connected to David's accounts, the moment felt like crossing from patience into decisive action. Each legal filing was crafted with care and precision, backed by solid evidence painstakingly gathered over weeks. This was more than a financial move. It was a demand for respect and justice, a refusal to allow my sacrifices to be trampled without consequence. The household tension escalated quickly. The comfortable bubble that had shielded David's life popped, replaced by anxiety and whispered conversations fraught with denial and fear. The luxury they once took for granted faded as creditors' notices appeared, and the reality of frozen assets became impossible to ignore. The burden shifted visibly from me to David, and the strain cracked open years of ignored responsibility. David's demeanor changed drastically, swinging from bluster to bitterness. His calls became frantic, laced with threats and desperation, but his confidence dissolved with every phone call. I remained calm, responding in measured tones, refusing to powder his thunder with emotional outbursts. His attempts to intimidate me only solidified my resolve. He had underestimated the man he was challenging. The house became a battleground. Family gatherings, once warm and predictable, grew cold and awkward. I watched relatives caught between loyalties and doubts, many shifting uneasily in the folds of the unfolding drama. It became clear the pedestal David had sat upon was wobbling, its foundation corroded by truths long denied. The more I dug, the more I found. Working with trusted lawyers, accountants, and financial consultants, I systematically uncovered a tangled web of financial mismanagement, concealed debts, and forged signatures. The evidence was irrefutable. Questionable loans, unauthorized transactions, and misrepresented contracts. Each discovery was a blow not just financially, but to David's credibility and self-image. A breakthrough came when a former business associate, disillusioned by David's reckless ventures, provided critical testimony confirming hidden liabilities and poor financial decisions. This insider perspective was vital, supplying the kind of evidence that courts respect, facts corroborated by those with direct experience. The strain on the family was undeniable. Events became less frequent, and when they did occur, polite smiles hid simmering resentments. Yet throughout I maintained my dignity and focus, knowing that the fight was for more than money. It was for the honor and legacy Maria and I had spent a lifetime building. Mornings were devoted to reviewing legal documents and correspondence, evenings to strategizing with lawyers and consultants. I found solace in routine and purpose, anchored by the memory of Maria's unwavering strength and belief in family values. This mission was not a vengeance, but a defense of integrity. I could see the erosion of David's facade in the changing eyes of those around us. Once secure in his entitlement, he was now vulnerable, faced with the consequences of years of neglect masked by arrogance. His public reputation suffered quietly as whispers of financial troubles spread within our social circles. Behind closed doors, David's communications shifted from defiance to appeals and vague promises of change. But I remained firm, unwilling to negotiate away the principles at stake. This was about accountability and restoration, not empty words. In quieter moments, I reflected on the transformation within myself. The pain of betrayal had given way to a new identity, one of a calm, resolute strategist, guided by experience and an unshakable sense of justice. The fight was difficult and lonely, but every sacrifice and hardship had prepared me for this path. The legal victories, though incremental, felt monumental. Frozen accounts, voided contracts, disputed property claims, all moved the needle toward restoring balance and order. Each success was a testament not to vengeance, but to careful planning and faith in the rule of law. This was not merely a personal battle, but a test of the very values that had held our family together: honesty, respect, and responsibility. Maria's memory was my constant companion in this struggle, a reminder of the dignity worth protecting. As the months pressed on, the course remained challenging, but the horizon grew clearer. The truth, once buried, now shone through relentless effort and courage. No longer the man overwhelmed by betrayal, I stood steady, guarding a legacy built on love and sacrifice. The house, once fractured, began the slow process of healing. Old wounds remained, but scars were forming too, marks of survival and renewal. I had reclaimed more than finances. I had restored dignity and set an example of strength and resolve. For Maria and the future we had dreamed of for myself, and for the enduring truth that family must honor sacrifice, I stayed firm. I was ready to meet whatever battles remained with the quiet certainty of a man who knew his worth and would never back down. The courtroom was a place of hushed solemnity, far removed from the turmoil and betrayals that had filled my life for so long. As the judge reviewed the evidence, every document, every affidavit I had gathered over months seemed to gather weight and meaning. It was the culmination of painstaking work, the result of patience and relentless perseverance. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, it felt as though a long-held breath had been released. The ruling was clear. David's claims to certain properties were revoked, the misappropriated funds ordered restored, and his financial maneuvers subjected to ongoing scrutiny. It was more than justice. It was acknowledgement, a recognition of the sacrifices underlined by years of silent endurance. Watching David's reaction was a study in contrasts. The arrogance that once colored his every move faded to a stunned silence. His posture slumped, face clouded with disbelief. I saw no satisfaction or triumph in my own reflection, only the gravitas of a man who had fought not for vengeance, but for dignity. The courtroom air was thick with quiet acknowledgement that the tide had shifted irrevocably. News of the verdict rippled through the family network and beyond, spreading cautiously but inevitably. Where once David's shadow had loomed large and unquestioned, skepticism and reconsideration began to surface. Allies grew cautious, and conversations among relatives slowly opened to honesty and reflection. The pedestal once built on entitlement began to crumble, replaced by a more earnest reckoning. Returning home, the environment shifted subtly but palpably. The heavy silence hanging over the house softened, giving way to tentative attempts at rebuilding connections. The fractures between family members remained visible, but the atmosphere no longer crackled with the tension of unresolved conflict. I noticed glimmers of hope, gentle gestures, tentative reconciliations, the first steps toward healing deep emotional wounds. David himself transformed through this process. The bravado and contempt gave way to a weary resignation. Our interactions, once fraught and furious, settled into a strained civility, punctuated by long silences and unspoken grief. It was painfully clear that the bond we had shared was fractured in ways that time alone might not fully mend. But I understood that my role was no longer to plead for understanding, but to stand firm in the principles of accountability and respect. For me, the victory was deeply personal. It signified not just reclamation of asset or title, but the resurgence of self-respect and peace of mind. I had journeyed through betrayal and confusion to a place of calm, fortified by the knowledge that I acted with integrity and wisdom. Each step in the legal process was a building block in reconstructing my shattered confidence, restoring the honor that had been challenged. Maria's presence lingered in quiet moments. I would find myself staring at her worn photograph, feeling the warmth of her unwavering faith in us as a family. It was her voice that urged me onward through dark nights and moments of doubt, reminding me that dignity and love were worth any price. My efforts, I knew, were as much for her memory as for the future we had planned together. Preparations to solidify our family's future became paramount. I worked with trusted advisors to update wills, restructure accounts, and establish safeguards against any further mismanagement. It was a way to honor what Maria and I had built, ensuring that the next generations inherited not just wealth, but stability and integrity. Family gatherings, once heavy with tension, gradually resumed with a fragile warmth. Old grievances remained unspoken, but seemed more manageable. I fostered open dialogue among relatives, encouraging honesty and mutual respect to rebuild trust. This was a slow, delicate process, but necessary to transform pain into resilience. The wider community, too, responded to the revelation of truth. I sensed a growing respect among acquaintances and neighbors who had observed the quiet drama unfold from afar. The narrative shifted from whispers of scandal to recognition of steadfastness and justice pursued with dignity. Though the scars of the ordeal remained, they stood as marks of survival, not defeat. They testified to the strength forged through adversity, the capacity to endure betrayal and emerge stronger. The man I was before the conflict had faded, replaced by someone who understood that true power lay not in rage or revenge, but in measured resolve and principled action. In the sanctuary of my home, I often reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The path from sorrow to strength had been neither quick nor easy, but it had shaped a new identity rooted in experience and wisdom. I did not seek to erase the past, but to carry its lessons forward as guiding lights for the future. Each night as dusk settled, I gazed out the window at the fading light, feeling a profound peace. The battle had tested every fiber of my being, but the price paid had been worth the restoration achieved. I realized that cutting ties with betrayal was not just an end, but a rebirth, a freedom to live with renewed purpose. With Maria's memory etched deeply in my heart, I embraced a life defined by dignity and quiet strength. The legacy we had built was safe, not because it was untouched by pain, but because it was tempered by resilience and love. As the stars emerged and the night grew still, I whispered to the quiet dark a vow renewed: to live honorably, to protect what is precious, and to walk forward on my own terms, no longer burdened by betrayal but empowered by the freedom earned through steadfast resolve. The house settled into a quiet rhythm I had come to cherish, an almost sacred calm after years of unease and conflict. The noise that had once filled its walls was replaced by a comforting stillness, the kind that comes from knowing the worst storms have passed. Each morning, I found myself greeting the day with a renewed sense of purpose, a clarity that had long eluded me while locked in the battle to protect what was mine. The wounds left by betrayal remained, like faint scars beneath the surface, but they no longer ached as they once did. Instead, they served as reminders of endurance and lessons learned. Sitting in my study, the soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains, illuminating the photographs of Maria and our family. Her smile was a beacon of hope and strength that had guided me through the darkest nights. I often thought about the sacrifices we had made together, how every choice, every hardship had been woven into the fabric of our lives in the hope of securing a future grounded in love and stability. Those memories were neither bitter nor regretful. They were precious to me, the foundation upon which I would continue to build. Family life took on a new shape, fragile but promising. While the rifts of the past still lingered, conversations grew more honest, and the desire to understand each other replaced defensiveness. I invested time in nurturing these fledgling connections, knowing full well that healing was a gradual process, requiring patience and grace. It was clear that the path forward would not erase our past, but it could redefine how we moved beyond it together. The laughter of grandchildren brought genuine joy back into the house, their innocence acting as balm for old wounds. Watching them play and grow, free from the shadows that had once hung so heavily over our family, reminded me that life moves forward, always offering new chances for happiness and connection. These small moments, filled with light and hope, were more valuable than any material restitution could ever be. Out in the world beyond my front door, I noticed the subtle shift in how people regarded us. Neighbors and old friends who once cast veiled glances tinged with speculation now offered nods of respect and quiet words of encouragement. The community's view transformed, recognizing not just the conflict, but the grace and dignity with which I had carried myself throughout. It was a humbling validation that reaffirmed my belief in perseverance guided by integrity. At times, the loneliness of leadership weighed heavily on me. The burden of standing firm while balancing the desire for reconciliation was delicate. Yet in those moments, I reminded myself of Maria's unyielding spirit and the values she instilled in me. Honor, resilience, and the courage to face hardship with dignity. These principles had shaped my resolve and would continue to guide me in the quieter days ahead. I took comfort in routine, the gentle rituals of daily life that grounded me. Morning coffee by the window, evenings spent with a book or piano melodies echoing softly through the rooms, and quiet reflections on all that had transpired. Each act was a reaffirmation of life's continuity and a step toward reclaiming joy. Looking out at the twilight sky, I often felt a profound sense of peace mingled with gratitude. The battle had tested every fiber of my being, demanding sacrifices that sometimes seemed unbearable. But in the end, the freedom won. A freedom grounded not in punishment, but in restored dignity, was worth every hardship endured. The pain of betrayal, though never forgotten, had softened into a source of quiet strength. The legacy that Maria and I had built was safe now, not because it was untouched by conflict or loss, but because it had been tempered by love and perseverance. I understood fully that true inheritance is as much about values and character as it is about assets. With each day, I found myself more connected to that truth, more determined to live by it. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, I whispered to the night a vow rekindled and renewed, to live with honor, to protect what is precious, and to walk forward on my own terms. No longer burdened by betrayal or the demands of others, I embraced the freedom earned through steadfast resolve, a freedom that gave my life new meaning and purpose. And so, with Maria's enduring memory lighting my path, I stepped into the future, not as a man defined by past wounds, but as one shaped by resilience, love, and the unwavering strength to stand tall, no matter what may come.